What's up, everybody? Welcome to Hardtail Party. Today we are reviewing the beautiful Curve DownRock. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We love all things hardtails here. I love reviewing hardtails so you can know if this bike would be a good fit for you and what you like in a bike and where you ride. I have a dedicated video about this bike with its geometry, its specs, lots of frequently asked questions on the first look. Go watch that video if you need more details about this bike. It's very thorough. Today we're in my hometown of beautiful Sedona, Arizona. I'm going to take this out on the trail. I picked a good black diamond that I think suits it really well. It's called Ground Control. It's got a wonderful technical climb and a nice, steep, kind of slow tech descent with some fast movements in there as well. I'll do my best to describe to you what this bike rides like so you can know if it's a good fit for you and if it's something you'd want to buy. All right, let's hit the trail. This is a light bike. The build came in under 28 pounds. Man, this thing has a tall stack. I'm used to running these 35 mil rise bars on all my bikes, and I'm actually tempted to run a 20 mil rise on this bike. I've slammed the stem all the way down. It almost had a little too much stack my first ride on it. I'm just gonna come out and say it. This bike is stiff. Probably the stiffest tie bike I've ever ridden. I've got a few aluminum bikes that are softer than this. That stiffness means it really accelerates well. When you put power down, it just picks up speed. I love that this bike does not feel like a massive, like overly slack, overly radical bike. It's just a good modern geo. It's got a steep seat tube and you feel that, and I love it. It gets my body forward so I don't really have to slide forward on the saddle to keep the front end down. Yeah, that back end wants to bounce. Man, it's a harsh frame and these are harsh wheels. Now, most people are smarter than I am and would take a full suspension to Sedona. But this is where I live. And I love hardtails, even when it's chunky. So to me, frame compliance is so crucial. And this one, I just have less traction, a little less control. Man, this bike carries momentum well. Feels like a 27.5 bike when you stand up. It does not feel like a 64-degree head angle. It feels quite agile. Got a nice short rear end so it doesn't feel like you're driving a bus. It pedals extremely well. But yeah, I do get some chatter on that back wheel from the stiffer dirt hoops wheels and this stiffer frame. This bike definitely handles like a modern bike with modern geo. It encourages you to sprint into the obstacles instead of just kind of leaning back and being lazy and just kind of sitting behind the rear axle. It definitely rewards an active riding position. If you haven't seen my video on modern riding technique yet, go check it out. That'll describe it better. This bike really wants a modern riding technique. It's got a nice riding position though, especially for pedaling and climbing. Got that tall stack so you don't feel hunched over. It's not ridiculously long, so I don't feel super stretched out. You definitely notice that lower bottom bracket, and not so much for rock strikes, just that you just feel really planted on this thing. But once you've ridden a few really soft frames, the stiff ones really stand out. I'm 5'6", 175 pounds. I grew up racing BMX, then got into mountain biking in my teens. Been mountain biking for 25 years now. I love mountain biking and I love hardtails. Here we go, up ground control climb. I love this climb, especially on a modern bike that encourages you to sprint and attack the trail. So this bike does not feel floppy in the front. If you're coming from a bike from the 90s, it will. But if you've been riding modern bikes for the last 5 years, it's just gonna feel normal to you. It's interesting, I actually climb tech better on modern, slacked out, longer bikes than XC bikes. That longer reach just gives me more stability and more room to move around. And this is a great climber. It's a great fire road climber and it's a great tech climber. A little more tech here. Yeah, no drama. It feels like a 27.5 in a lot of ways. I think it's the smaller wheelbase and that high stack. So yeah, stiffness and harshness of a frame is way more of an issue in the desert in this chunky stuff. If you live in the Pacific Northwest or California, Florida, Maine, just places that I know you have rocks, but just not jarring cinder block sized rocks in the trail, you might actually prefer a little stiffer frame like this. Whew, that picks up speed. That's a light bike. Yeah, this thing wants to go so fast. It's not quite as long as most of the bikes I review. It does feel just a tad shorter. That makes it a little more maneuverable at speed, but a tiny bit less composed at steeps and faster downhills. Oh, this bike. Whoo-hoo-hoo. It's loose and slippery today. This bike wants to charge big time. I need some better brakes than these TRP slates on here for how this bike wants to be ridden. That was me not weighting the front enough in that corner. Bad technique, loose terrain, a little bit stiffer wheels. Oh, this bike, it's so easy to put where you want on the climbs. Some bikes you just kind of teeter, track standing, trying to save your balance. This bike is a little more intuitive. It just kind of knows what you want to do. Yeah, it'll tractor, but it'll also handle these chunky climbs with ease. What a cool bike. If you're over 180 pounds, especially if you're over 200, I think you're gonna like the stiffness of this frame. Definitely won't feel noodly to you. But if you're lighter, like 160 pounds or even lighter, you're gonna get bounced around and fatigued on this. That stiffness means it accelerates real well under pressure, under pedaling. Awesome. It's got a really short seat tube, so I could actually run a 170 dropper on here. I love that. There are very few hardtails I can run a 170 on. Here we go on the technical Black Diamond downhill. A couple double black sections. I think 130 mil travels perfect on this bike. I think that's perfect on most hardtails. Any more and the stack would be even higher. The brakes are not cutting it. So even on a stiff bike, the harder you push it, the more it starts to flex. So when you charge really hard, you won't notice it being overly stiff. I'm feeling it though, it's bouncing me around a little more than normal. This bike feels really composed, despite its slightly shorter reach than a lot of other bikes I ride. I could easily size up and still get I could easily size up and get a little bit more stability. I'd lose some of that slow speed agility that I'm liking on this right now. But with the seat tube being as short as it is, you really have the option to go in between sizes. And they even have a medium large size, which I know a lot of my bike consultation patrons will appreciate, because you know most riders are 5'10" or close to it, and that's right in between a medium and a large. Yeah, this is stiff. Just, I'm fighting it a little bit. I mean, it's a hardtail, so it's gonna be a little bouncy, but that stiffness just kind of wants to buck you offline. I'm gripping, I'm over clenching the bars, just kind of hanging on for dear life. It's just a little bit chattery through that stuff. Anyway, my bike patrons who are in between sizes are gonna love that this has a medium large size. And I could be on that right now, and it would have been a little more stable down that stuff, but this didn't hold me back one bit. So personally, I actually think this is the size I would get, the medium, because it's actually really zippy and fun and has like a shorter wheelbase, and that shorter wheelbase makes it more fun at slower speeds and on mellower stuff. So I guess it just depends on where you're riding it. If you want an all-out shred machine, this will do it, just size up. But if you want more of an all-rounder that's still plenty composed in that stuff, maybe pick the size they recommend for you. Now, I mentioned it before, this bottom bracket's about 7 mil lower than most bikes I review. And that makes for a super planted, stable in the bike feeling. Your feet are low, your center of gravity's low, driving through the bottom of the bike. People call that being in the bike instead of on top of the bike. So even though it's only about 7 mil lower than most bikes, like my Banshee Paradox was already low, so then you go and make it even lower. It's just very planted on corners. But you need that modern riding technique. You can't steer at the bars. And that's why I slid out earlier. I was getting lazy. I think this would actually be a really great bike packer too. Really comfortable riding position. A little slacker than most people need for bike packing, but it'll do just fine. So yeah, that lower bottom bracket has a lot of good things about it. There are some disadvantages to a low bottom bracket though. It's harder to wheelie. Now we've got a short chainstay, so like emergency manuals at the last second when you come around something you need to just huck off. It's great at those thanks to the short chainstay. But for like doing sustained manuals and bunny hops and playing around, that lower feel makes it harder to get up and off the ground. Now if you're a pro like Jeff Kendall-Weed, you could manual a shopping cart. To me, it's a noticeable difference with this lower bottom bracket. Man, it accelerates quick. Okay, it's more playful than most. It's not on par with like the RSD Middle Child or the Binary Maniac or Santa Cruz Chameleon or Sour Crumble for playfulness, but it is more stable than all of those. Really nice climbing position, really nice. I could ride this for days, just being in the saddle all day, and I'd be super comfortable. I'm so glad they kept that short rear end. Yeah, it'll play. Got a pretty good balance point. It's just different when you want to pop it into a manual. That lower bottom bracket's kind of pulling it down just a little, but you get used to it. You just need to pop it higher than normal to get into that balance spot. I haven't done a very good job of talking about how good this bike is. I had super high expectations. I kind of came into it expecting it to be perfect based on what we saw on paper in the first look. It's not perfect, but it's still a very good bike. It climbs seated better than I thought. And even though the wheelbase feels nice and compact, the bike doesn't feel sketchy. Really great climber, whether it's fire road or techie stair, slow speed stuff. I don't know if I'd change the bottom bracket though. It's good. Like, it'll still manual and play, you just have to adjust. It just takes a little more initial pop to get into it. This bike's quite fun though. It doesn't feel like a dirt jumper on with a dropper like some of those other bikes I mentioned, but it's not far behind. Really great all-rounder that can handle just about anything. I'd be totally happy doing 6-hour days on this. It's not gonna be like a total mile muncher like the Stanton Sherpa or the Marin T-Marin 2 or my Spot Rocker, but it is better as a trail bike than a lot of slacked out enduro hardtails. But this will hang with the slacked out enduro hardtails. So yeah, if you don't love super long chainstays, you like a little playful nature to it, ability to slash it around corners quickly, more jibby, more fun at slow speeds, that shorter reach and shorter chainstay is going to play in your favor. If you like a more planted ride, or you're a super tall rider, something like the Kodak Solaris Max is going to suit your needs better with that super long chainstay that just puts you in the center of the bike, and you don't really have to put much body English into it because all your weight's in the middle and the front and back wheels are weighted the same. This bike takes a little more of an active riding position. A little bit harder to ride for the novice, but you'd pick it up real quick. On the flip side, that does reward an active rider who likes to bounce around and play and throw their weight around. Ever since this bike was announced, I've been trying to get my hands on it, and I'm so grateful to be able to have ridden this and tell you what it rides like compared to other hardtails I've had on the channel. Without a doubt, this is the most stunning, visually impressive bike I've had on the channel. The combination of the bead blast with the brushed finish, the subtle black graphics, less is definitely more, the beautiful welds, the awesome design of like the 180 post-mount brake, full external routing, short seat tube. The head badge is super cool. They've just made a beautiful, beautiful bike. To date, I've ridden over 70 modern hardtails, and I love riding them and comparing them. And I keep a list of notes of how each bike rides, how stiff they are, what they're great at, what they're not great at. And I make these reviews for free so that you can enjoy them and you can be informed when you make a purchase. If you'd like to pick my brain or chat with me about what I recommend for you, or if you need help building up the frame you just bought, I have a bike consultation service where I work one-on-one with my clients. You pay for a month at a time. We message back and forth. I ask a lot of questions. You give me a lot of answers, and vice versa, until you find the bike that you know you want next. That's the perfect bike for your budget and your riding style. At that point, you cancel the monthly service because you got what you needed. You go buy your bike and you have a great time, and you potentially avoid wasting thousands of dollars buying the wrong bike only to learn later on, oh, that was a 141 QR bike, or dang, I didn't realize 67 degrees is not a slack trail head angle like it used to be. Anyway, I've helped a lot of people avoid buying the wrong bike for them. When you go to a bike shop that only sells Trek and you ask them what bike to get, guess what the answer is going to be? A Trek. And so they're going to push the bikes they have on the floor. And I've seen so many people end up on the wrong bike for them because the salesman told them it would be a good bike for them. And even bike salesmen don't know hardtails very well. They've never ridden great hardtails either, so they can't really provide great input on hardtails. So that's a service that I offer. If you're interested in that, sign up. I got a link to it in the description below. A few of you have chimed in and said, hey, I've got one of those. I'm curious if it rides stiff or supple compared to other hardtails you've ridden. This is definitely on the stiff side of things. It's stiffer than a lot of aluminum bikes I've even ridden. But it's light and zippy, so when you put that power down, it doesn't flex, it just accelerates forward. But on the chunky, bumpy downs, where you could argue that's not a great place for a hardtail anyway, it's slacking and it kind of loses traction, it loses control, it bounces more than it tracks. And a supple frame's not flexing like a full suspension. It's just like the difference of letting out 3 PSI in your tire. It just tracks a little better. It just smooths things out ever so slightly. Those micro vibrations aren't transferring to your body so much. Even with my 5-dev cranks, which are softer than most, it was still a chattery, borderline harsh ride on this bike. The harder you push it and the harder you rail it, the more it will reward you. But for mediocre, medium speed stuff like what I did today, it was too stiff. Now, if you're 200 pounds or more, you're going to love this stiffness and it will flex for you far more than it does for me. And as you go bigger in size, it will flex more too as the triangles get bigger and there's a little more leverage on there. Be careful though, comparing bike A to bike B. Just because a bike has a bigger rear triangle doesn't necessarily mean it will be softer than something else. You have to take into consideration tubing thickness, tubing diameter, bracing, how it all comes together. So I try to avoid blanket statements like titanium frames are always ride softer than steel frames. That's not true. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Or aluminum's always stiff and harsh. Not true. I've got aluminum frames that ride as good as most steel frames. Now, Curve is an Australian company, but these bikes are welded and assembled in China. I have no problem with that because the quality and attention to detail on this rivals the best stuff I've seen out of Taiwan, which is the best in the world. I think this is every bit as well built as a Moots, probably even better. The guys building these frames in China and Taiwan have so many hours behind the lens TIG welding that they just have more experience than most American builders as well. So the frame's coming in just under $2,700. We used to be able to see Thai frames from China cheaper, but there's titanium shortages, there's work shortage even in China. The shipping's gotten ridiculously expensive. The backlog and the demand has gotten crazy, and so prices are going up on everything. You've seen it on food, on gas, on housing. Bikes are getting affected by it as well. So it's not a budget bike, but keep in mind they're an Australian company, so when you go on their website, their prices are in Australian dollars, not US dollars. So make sure you convert that currency, or your eyes are going to pop out of your head thinking it's super duper expensive. I've been on a few rides with this bike with my control wheels on it, the nuke-proof Horizon V2s. That's what I throw on every bike that I get in for review so that I can get a feel for how harsh the frame is. And the frame was still stiff even with those wheels, but it's even stiffer with these carbon wheels. Most carbon wheels, I'm going to say 95% of carbon wheels out there will make a hardtail ride stiffer. It'll accelerate faster, it'll have this liveliness to it, this excitement, but it will bounce a little bit more and transfer more vibration to your body. Some people think I harp on suppleness and comfort way too much and say, why don't you just get a full suspension? That's a cop-out answer. And that just means you haven't ridden a truly great hardtail, because a truly great hardtail is a thing of beauty, and it cannot be described in words just how different it is from a ho-hum hardtail. In no ways is this a ho-hum hardtail. This is a beautiful, wonderful hardtail, but it does lack a little bit of that refinement that a hand-built, supple, lightweight tubing frame will have, and that's what I'm always in search of. So who's this bike for? This bike is for somebody that has smoother terrain than me, or someone that weighs more than I do, or someone that really appreciates beautiful quality things. This is a lifetime bike. This is not the bike that you ride for a year, get bored of it, and sell it. This is a bike that 20 years from now, your kids are going to be saying, hey, can I have that DownRock yet? I want to go shred some trails on it. And it's going to be every bit as cool and beautiful and radical as it is now. Geo-wise, what would I change? I don't think I would raise the bottom bracket. I know I talked a lot about how it's low. It's still a playful frame. It'll still play. It just takes a little bit more effort. And I think the Geo's really good for what it is. I like the short rear end, especially coupled with the low bottom bracket. We've got a short wheelbase, so it weaves in and out of things easily. It's easy to place where you want it to be. It's easy on climbs, like slow speed tech climbs where you're almost tipping over. It was no problem because of that shorter wheelbase. I really like it. I don't feel like it needs to be any slacker. It might even benefit from a half a degree to a degree steeper. But when you go changing little things like that, you kind of mess with the whole balance of everything. And it's so balanced, I wouldn't want to change that. So Geo, I actually think is spot on. I like that you can size up if you want, that they keep their seat tube small. So you could size up or go with their recommended ones, or size down if you wanted to as well. I love the tall stack. There's no way I would want to ride this with a 150 fork. It would just bring that front end up even more, and it would just kind of feel like a chopper to me. Some people love that feel. You could do it. You'd probably want flat bars because that front end's so high, and that would raise the bottom bracket. That would make it pop and play a little bit more, but I'd wonder if it would actually lead to it kind of lifting on climbs and having the front wheel come up under power. If I was looking for a jib bike that's just like a pump track bike and a dirt jump bike or a flow jump trail bike, and I didn't care about stability and technical stuff, I'd probably pick a bike with a higher bottom bracket. But for an all-rounder, this thing still jumps great, still plays great, just not quite at that level of those high bottom bracket bikes. So pros for this bike: it's lightweight, it's beautiful, craftsmanship is off the charts, Geo is fantastic, short seat tube, tall stack, so many pros going on. Downsides, it is expensive when you compare it to steel frames or aluminum frames. I would personally rather have a hand-built steel frame for the price of this than this frame, because those hand-built steel frames just have such a glorious ride feel. They can, some of the best ones. I've got a few coming on the channel that you're going to want to see that just ride like a dream, and they're within a quarter pound of this thing. So they might rust, you got to paint them. There's some downsides there, but they're actually a little bit cheaper than this when built, and the ride feel is just dreamy on those. And to me, ride feel's just about everything. Ride feel and geometry. Those are the things that are hard to tell what a bike's going to ride like on paper. I'm a huge fan of Curve. I love what they're doing. I love their Monster Cross gravel bike that fits 29 by 3.0s. They think a lot like I do. I think if they made a version 2 of this, I would just love to see it use thinner tubing or smaller tubing diameter on the smaller frame so that it had less of a stiff ride. It's not like bone-jarring harsh like the Commencal Meta or that Ruroc Conleon, but it is just, it doesn't quite feel like the best of the best supple stuff out there. And when you're paying $2,700 for a frame, if you want supple, wait for something supple. If you don't, this could be an excellent option for you. It felt very much like a 27.5 bike a lot of the time. I think it's just the short wheelbase and that front high end. And it was just easy to kind of dart through things. It kept momentum like a 29er, but it kind of handled like a 27.5. And that's what we're all going for, is that playful, agile handling of the 27.5 with the rollover speed and momentum of 29ers. And I think Curve's done a good job with this. You guys are awesome. Thanks for loving hardtails. Thanks for watching this channel. Thanks for the awesome comments you post on every video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. There's a party in the mountains and you're invited.